everybody, I'm Gosia Cosmic Agency and welcome to the next episode of the mini topics. And today not only mini topics but also mini topics. And these mini topics will be just like random questions and very short answers or comments, okay? So today we'll talk a little bit about HAARP, then Earth and its rings, why the Earth doesn't have rings, it's a question from someone. Then how was the asteroid belt created and the Kuiper belt. Then a little bit more about astrology and being born on a specific date and how it relates to your characteristics. Then we will mention Ouija board. What does Yazhi think about the Ouija board, the board they use to connect with the spirits. Then we'll also talk about tarot. What's Yazhi's opinion about tarot cards, and then we'll go into mini topics, which is going to be like 9 different very short topics. Now I have many more topics to discuss. I had so many that I had to actually divide this into 2 parts. So this is just one video, and then in the very near future I'm going to make another mini. Okay, because a lot of these mini topics have accumulated recently. Okay, first I'm gonna share with you a very short comment about something that was floating around December time among conspiracy circles, that supposedly on December 27th they were supposed to activate HAARP. I know this is a bit outdated. I actually had this on my blog at that time, so maybe you know what I will be saying here, but for those who haven't read that, let me just say this, that yeah, they were supposed to activate something on the 27th. They're always saying that, you know, things will be happening. And Toleka crew didn't discover anything unusual. So Yazhi says nothing unusual was discovered and the Toleka is closed. Toleka is the Titan ship, is close by and with sensors that can detect even a working car coil. But now, this is why I'm pointing to this subject, okay? Because it's not that relevant anymore what happened or not happened on December 27th. The point here is that it's not that they did not or did activate the HAARP. Rather, from here, we see that it is working all the time. So it is normal. And there was nothing abnormal on those days. Working all the time, and it is no longer just HAARP as it is known, as those installations like they had in Alaska or somewhere in Australia. That's old, that's beginnings of HAARP. Now it is a system of many smaller units. Some are fixed in normal facilities on different bases, and some of them are mobile, like on warships or any type of specialized ships or trucks. So then what they do, they put many of these transmissions together, add them up, and cause a reaction as if it was coming from one big installation. But because the signals come from countless sources, those who control HAARP have much more control and precision over what comes out as a result. So in the case of the 27th, nothing happened on that day, but you must understand that they use it all the time. The weather is controlled. It's not just one specific occasion they are going to be using this. So that's very important. Okay, now next topic is on Earth and its rings, or rather its absence of rings. And this came from someone in the English channel who watched a video on one of the planets in the solar system, Sirius, and they were asking, well, how come the Earth doesn't have rings? Because it was mentioned there, Swaruu mentioned, that all the big planets have rings. So why doesn't Earth have rings? And Robert here, who was present in the conversation says, well, why should it have them? And I explained, well, because it was mentioned in the video that they have them. So I'm going to look for the text in that moment in the conversation. I'm going to look for the text specific quote from that Yazhi, from that Swaruu transcript. And in the meantime here, Yazhi is explaining, it depends on the definition of ring, of what material. In the case of the Earth, could it be Van Allen belts, the space debris, Rings are an exception when there is loose material in sufficient quantity in close proximity to a planet. I would say that most planets do not have rings. And also, Robert says they would be incompatible with the moon, right? Yes, he says it depends on where they would be, but yes, they would be a complication for the spacecraft moon. And here, while I'm looking for the text, still, Robert is asking, the Earth has never had natural satellites before, right? And this is what Yazhi responds. I understand that in astrophysics, a small planet like Earth is not conducive to having natural satellites. For example, the case of Mars with its satellites Phobos and Deimos, they are ancient bases, hollowed out rocks, but put there artificially. The moon, from the point of view of non-humans in space, is painfully artificial, as its size is visibly large, too large for a natural satellite. Earth-sized planets very rarely have natural satellites and of this size, and when they do, they are very small. So Robert is asking, so in the past, the Earth didn't have natural satellites, right? Because the Earth is too small. Yes, he says that's right. It can't have something like the moon naturally. It doesn't have enough mass to hold it. And then Yazhi clarifies, but I must say that the Earth has some rocks or asteroids that orbit it for a long time. There are many, and they are small, the size of a couple of railroad cars. Those would be its natural satellites. And I don't doubt that the Cabal says that they can collide with the Earth. I don't know how many there are, but I'm talking about more than 20. So we have those, but they are very, very small. And here I come back in the conversation and I have the text where Swaruu said that each big planet has rings. So I say, this is the quote from Swaruu. I don't know if the rings of Uranus are very small. I don't know if they can be included as rings. In fact, all the big planets have rings. And Yazhi says, so it says big. In that case, yes, she's right. The Earth is very small compared to the other big planets. For example, Jupiter has rings, Uranus and Neptune also tenuous, but they are there. So that's why Earth doesn't have rings. It's too small for that. And also on the topic of what's going on in space, planets and all that, why is there an asteroid belt? Or in other words, how was it formed? So Yazhi responds that the asteroid belt is made up of 80% dirty ice and 20% rock, metals and other elements. And they are remains of the extinct planet Tiamat. It was formed when that planet disintegrated. And now Kuiper belt is outside the solar system. So how was that created? And yes, he says that it is the collection of debris that enters the solar system and goes fishing as it passes through deep space. Okay, so I'm asking, so if the planets do not explode, the asteroid belts do not get formed. And Yazhi says that's right. They are very rare in other solar systems, the asteroid belts. Not to say that there are none. I don't know of any other with asteroid belts. So that answers that question, okay? On the asteroid belts and the Earth and its rings. Okay, next mini topic. And here we continue with the conversation about astrology. And Robert was in the conversation and he's asking, okay, because we said that when the person is born, it is born on that specific date because that's what he is. That's what he is. So that would mean that two people who are born exactly at the same time, they would be the same. And that would mean, in theory, they should have the same characteristics, same personality, interests, and all. Right? Or maybe not. And yes, he says, I have a strong tendency to say no. because things are not that simple and there are always other factors that are defining each person. But astrological science would dictate that they do have to be very similar in personality, energy, and interests and reactions. And Robert says, well, yeah, I also think there are other factors here. Like, for example, where you are born as well. You may be born at the same time, but in a different location. Also here, the second also is important. Each second, the dynamic changes. So yes, he says, yes, there are other factors, other elements. And we could also say that those other factors are the ones that define the differences between each person. For example, their family, cultural and social environment. And she continues, because if you insist on putting a person in the exact same conditions so that all the frequencies around them match, you would end up with the same person, with one. But, as you know, even a sibling, clone, sibling, twin, would have a slightly different point of view, simply because they are looking at the same room from another perspective, even if it's a meter away. Okay, now, changing slightly the subject here, Robert is asking about this. Okay, so the kings and the billionaires who believe in the astrology and they operate according to that, that would mean if they have a child, they would want to delay or accelerate the birth of the child so that those people, those babies, their sons and daughters are more in accordance with some stars and not the others. Is that what they do? And she says, yes, of course. More so because they do believe in astrology. Okay, but here I'm entering and I'm saying, but in that case, I feel like they don't understand how the astrology works, because you cannot force the person to be born on a specific day because that's not who they are. Because we said that the astros don't influence, they simply reflect who you are. So you are born where you correspond, where you belong. You cannot be born on any other day and time because that's not who you are. How can you force that? That being that you are is already that something. It will be born where it belongs. So it seems to me that they don't understand how it really works. And here she says how they do it. By modifying the date of birth artificially, you can propitiate the entry of one soul or another with different characteristics that coincide with the stars. Okay, so this is different here. You're not forcing the same soul to be changing characteristics. It's impossible. That soul already has those characteristics. You cannot change that by changing their date of birth. But they are making another soul enter with the characteristics that they seek. And they do that by modifying the date of birth artificially. And yes, he says, at least they propitiate that to happen. And if that first soul insists, it will enter. Maybe not that time, but perhaps the next one, when the mother got pregnant by accident and they decided to keep it. Okay, and here I'm asking, okay, but how can you propitiate that one soul enters and not the other? I mean, the soul enters at 3 weeks, enters the fetus very early, from what I remember. So how can you modify that? That one specific soul enters and not the other. And yes, he says, well, that's why the modification of the date of birth would have to be before that date. Before that date. Because after that, they will not be able to modify the date of birth, just a few weeks or days. Or they will place the fetus in danger. And yes, it is more difficult to schedule the pregnancy earlier, but it is done mostly artificially. Okay, and here Robert is asking, and it's a good point to consider, why does it even matter when you were born? Why the date of your birth and not the date when your soul enters the fetus? I mean, you as a soul, you are already there inside in the womb. Why does it matter when you come out, that specific date? Why not when you enter the fetus, physicality? And Yazhi says, it is irretrievably linked. All the dates, from conception to birth, are all linked, interconnected as the same thing. The influence and the definition of soul frequency is formed earlier, yes. Birth is only one important point, but not all that is important. Yeah, because it would be very difficult to know the entry of the soul to the fetus. Maybe that's why they take the date of birth to do their charts and all that. She says, it used to be very difficult to know. Nowadays, not so much on Earth. I guess she's referring to the artificial births and all that. And on topic of artificiality, this is what she comments here as well. More artificiality will lead to things or entities entering empty bodies with little or no connection to the original source. And Robert says, oh, so that is why natural births are so important, right? The baby is born differently being in a real mother's womb because of the connection to the mother rather than being from the machine, right? Well, she says, yes, however, it's important. Yes, however, I wouldn't push the idea that the test tube babies or wombless babies don't have souls either. I would just say that it lends itself to abuse and shady things, which then connect to parasitization by lower astral entities. But in propitious circumstances, it could be a normal person with a soul with a full connection to the source. Being machine-born only propitiates, but does not define or condemn someone to have little or no connection to the original source. Okay? So this was the chat about the date of birth and all that we have. This is sometimes, this is how we talk. We talk about a specific subject for a little while. It's a random, casual conversation. Then it goes into something else. So I'm sharing these bits and pieces with you here. And now the next bit and piece is about tarot cards. And this came from the question that someone left me in the Spanish world, asking me if Yazhi knows if the tarot is Masonic, there's any relation to that, and generally about tarot cards, if they work. So Yazhi has this to say on this topic. I would have to check its connection to Freemasonry, but yes, it is highly probable. The cards themselves of whatever system, just like any other tool, do not contain or possess any power. They are a tool to facilitate the person using them to channel their energy and turn it into something tangible and legible. As in, that person manifests the appropriate card, which contains a previously agreed upon meaning or meanings, and which can also change or can change from person to person who is using them. So Yazhi feels the cards can be useful, but she has never really paid much attention to them. She says they are just pieces of cardboard themselves, in themselves. So whether or not it is Masonic is of little consequence, except that they contain symbology and or procedures that can give permission or invoke spirits or entities or energies that can be quite regressive. Beware of that, but it is up to the individual. And here I am commenting from my own experience that I feel the tarot cards are useful. And this is because when I was in Barcelona about 12 years ago, I had the esoteric store, or a little spiritual store there, with the same name, Agence Cosmique, Cosmic Agency in Spanish. And I had a tarot reader every Friday, a lady. And she was amazing. And the tarot cards she was reading, it was not predictive tarot. Because there is a predictive one, and there are others, I'm sure. And then she was doing evolutive. I don't know what's the accent. Evolutionary. I'm not sure. Type of a tarot, which didn't have anything to do with predicting your future as such, which is something I'm not sure that's how it works. It was about just reading the energies and dynamics of your life regarding certain situations you were asking about and helping you understand that. And she was perfect. She was a very good psychologist. I actually have an interview with her. I'm not sure if I have English subtitles. Maybe I do. I'll put the link here. That was the interview I did with her before all this experience with the Toleka crew. And she was also a little bit of a psychic, so she was combining the gifts of psychology and symbology and her gifts as a psychic, and that was very useful to me. Actually, each time she was doing the reading for me, it was something very useful to help me understand the situation. So I believe they can be useful, those cards. And Yazhi says it depends on the person using them and the power of the person. Yes, their knowledge. You have to understand those symbols very, very well, and you know how to read this. And so the cards themselves, Yazhi says, don't have any power. Now, with the cards themselves not having any power, she says, however, having said that, now in the case of the Ouija board does seem to contain an inherent symbolism in the board itself. That's what Yazhi says. That facilitates the opening of portals of entry for entities that may or may not be regressive. Although it is the regressive ones that usually interact more with the people because they are mischievous. In the case of the cards, something similar could occur, but she's not sure because she hasn't had much experience with that. Very interesting. Now, on the topic of Ouija board, this is also something that Robert asked, and he wanted Yazhi's opinion about the subject. What would you tell the people who are using and playing with the Ouija board? She says, and she warns, to stop immediately. That thing opens portals. It is not an innocent game. The board was designed to bring entities. That's what it is for, to contaminate the population. Of course, it depends who is using it, some more, some less, as it happens with everything that has to do with frequencies. Now, Robert is asking how to close those portals once open. And she says, well, ignoring by looking the other way, but sometimes it is not that simple. It is complicated. Robert says, so I imagine that those entities that would enter would take advantage of the people around. And she says, well, yes, more if they are concordant in frequency. And Robert has a question, would renovating the house, painting the walls, would that help? And this has to do also with the topic that Yazhi Swaruu mentioned in her video about portals, when she was discussing the portals and the energies and the entities that manifest at specific points, specific areas, and how they emanate there. And would it help to reconstruct the house or paint if they are around the house? No, it doesn't help. It helps very little or nothing, because that portal is not attached to the walls of the house. That's not what it is about. In the end, says Yazhi, the house is not even needed. It is the specific point in the energetic field. House or no house, demolish it, build a parking lot there, it doesn't matter. That point is already cursed. That is to say, the material does not matter or little. For example, you demolish the house, that house that was haunted. It no longer exists in that place, but it still exists in the etheric. Because there, in the etheric, there is no before and there is no after for those entities that dwell there. So the house is still there in their minds that they imagine that they have. Well, that they do have. There's still ideas, minds. So because they are outside of space-time as people know it, that house still is there for them. That's an energetic point. And in the same way, when they, for example, are reconstructing the jails or hospitals where people die into residential areas, Robert is asking, you don't recommend living in those places, right? She says, no, I don't recommend it. It is exactly the same as not recommending to live in a house by the swamps. What happens by the swamps? You will be eaten by mosquitoes. It's just the way it is. It's the same here. Whether you see them, whether you like it or not, they are there, simply. What about, this is from Robert also, what about the exorcists and cleansers of bad energies? Would that help? Yes, she says, it does help, more so if they leave aside their religiosity, their religions, but it is complicated. Okay, now going back to the Ouija board, Robert says that many people still believe it's an innocent game, and Yazhi claims that they claim that because of their ignorance. Because, okay, it could be seen as just a board with some letters on it, but Yazhi says here the problem is the ritual behind it. What kind of ritual behind it? It gives permission for entities to enter. It opens doors. Doors which you will not be able to know how to close afterwards. And then Robert says, what about the, if you are opening the doors for lower astral entities, can you do the same for the higher entities as well? Well, yes, it is the same. From the high astral, the only thing that comes in would be loving and loving entities. Entities there will be your guides, but it's more difficult for them to enter. Here, Robert is asking, why is it easier to connect with those in the lower astral? Well, because on Earth you are usually in a lower frequency. The general frequency of this place is usually lower, and those entities are attracted to that. And now, why is it more frequent, those negative portals at the crossroads of the streets? And this also was mentioned in Mari's video about how the Toleka crew detected there was a big portal at the crossroad of a specific city on planet Earth. And Yazhi explains this is because there emanates energy of fear. People there emanate a lot of energy of fear, a little bit at a time, even if it's a little bit at a time. And then it accumulates in that one spot. Okay, now Robert is also asking if the channeling with the deceased could be viewed also as opening a portal. And Yazhi says, yes, if it is real, that channeling, then yes, it is the same. Now the problem is here, as they open portals, normally to the lower astral, what happens is that you don't know who it is you are contacting, because there are so many entities there that lie, that are mischievous, all doing that for some benefit. And Yazhi says that is what is most likely to happen. They are not channeling grandfather Don, but a deceitful spirit that is impersonating grandfather Don Pedro. And Robert asks, okay, so you could only talk to the deceased who stayed in the lower astral, right? Yazhi, or with a part or echo of the deceased that still remains in the lower astral, because it is out of time and space, but the real one is gone. It is possible, but unlikely. And the last question in this topic is, why is it, what's the reason why it can't be the relatives who communicate? And Yazhi responds, because the normal and good people continue their way to the afterlife, and they don't linger around bothering the living. Those who remain haunting a place, it is usually because they are afraid that their actions in life will be punished if they follow their path to the afterlife. And of course there are other reasons why they stay in the afterlife. We mentioned that in the previous videos on what happens after death. Okay, so we covered that, and now I have a section for you as a new section, mini topics, just random short comments from Yazhi on specific topics. Like for example, the first topic is a Chinese spy balloon. As you have heard, from January 28th to February 4th this year, there was a balloon that was seen over USA and some parts of Canada, from what I understand. And the American and Canadian militaries, they were saying that it was there for surveillance. And the Chinese government was maintaining that it was a civilian meteorological research airship that had been blown off course. So Robert was asking if Yazhi knows anything about this. Yazhi responds, I don't have details, but I do know that CIC, which is the equivalent of an intelligence department, and traffic control saw it and followed it. And I've even seen pictures of that thing, that balloon. To me, it's more cheap espionage between nations. Very 3D game. I don't know more. We didn't give it much importance, but yes, we saw it from here. Okay, cool. Now the question is from Dr. Alex about colloidal gold. Is it true that colloidal gold destroys nanotechnology? Yazhi responds, I have never heard that, but my feeling is that it does, by interaction of the high frequencies of gold with high conductivity. I can't say more, I don't know, but I do believe it's very possible. Now, this is a curious fact, and this fact comes from Urmas. Doesn't come from the Taygedens or Svarunians. This is something that Urmas have discovered. And it is that they discovered there is a plot against the Urmas on Earth, on the side by the part of the Cabal. And this is what Yazhi is saying. This is very interesting. I hope maybe we'll have more data in the future about this. Yazhi says, we have discovered a global plot against the Urmas and their starseeds, both human and cat. What kind of plot? We have no details, only that the energies of the soulless population and the Cabal are kind of focused against everything feline. That is, those who don't like cats are kind of attacking them. And the Cabal is looking to cut off the human Urma starseeds as well. There is no more concrete data to share. And this data comes from the Urma, not from us. They see something. They are analyzing the situation right now. They are very angry, and so are we. The cooperation between the Urmas and us has never been better, she says. Very curious, not surprised. Urmas are ferocious, very powerful, very strong. So, of course, they propose a big threat to the system. Let's see if we can find out more in the future about this. Okay, next mini topic, green comet. As you know, or maybe not, a rare green comet passing Earth for the first time since the Stone Age was about to pass next to Mars, and it was supposed to be easily seen with a simple pair of binoculars. So Robert was asking if Yazhi knew anything about this. Yazhi says, let's see, I heard something from here. The overall impression was that it is harmless, so the ships in orbit don't even flinch. They just follow it. I don't have any more data at this time. I can't know what they are referring to on Earth, but yes, comets that are just dirty snowballs with rocks do exist. They are always there. They are common celestial objects and even boring. I haven't paid real attention to that event, only because from the bridge they track nearby objects for the safety of the ship, and they see no danger. Now, the question from the follower in the Spanish world was about releasing the ashes of a deceased person into nature, and whether that intention to heal the suffering of that person does help. And Yazhi says, yes, it helps to centralize or focus the intention, that act of doing that. It does help. In itself, it also helps those who are left in the world of the living to heal their wounds from the departure of the loved ones. Yes, I recommend it. Well, just a curious fun fact here. I can't resist sharing with you all these little topics and mini topics as well. Well, here we have a question also from the Spanish world about, again, it was about those portals that Mari was talking about and kinesiology. Whether it is possible to heal some of these zones that have that negative low frequency, heal those zones with placing an object through kinesiology, usually a quartz or something. You place it in a vortex, and then that flow of energy is distributed and neutralizing the low frequency of the area. Is it possible? And the person here also takes the opportunity to ask about kinesiology in general. saying that many people use the pendulum, dowsing rods, or even the hands. So Yazhi says, more to the first question, is it possible to neutralize that area? The answer is yes, and she says it in capital letters, yes. But it's like fighting negative energy. It's like raising percentages, meaning some feed the low ones and then some feed the high ones. It's like a constant struggle here, and it averages out. That's how the matrix field works. That's why it works. And magnets also work, she says, magnets. Now, about the kinesiology, she says she doesn't have much reference or expertise on the subject. She does insist again that the magnets work, and that if the frequency of the magnets could be modulated, it would be even better. And then she says, from what little I can sense about kinesiology, I also have to validate it. Okay, next mini topic is about storing these things in the cloud, as you know, in the internet, in the cloud somewhere. This came up because Robert says that he doesn't store anything on the cloud. And this is what Yazhi believes this cloud is. She says the cloud is an euphemism for brainwashing people. It really means put your stuff on my computer. There is no such a thing as a cloud. That's distorting the truth, to get the people to accept that as if it's something anonymous, it's something neutral. Because if they said the public can use Microsoft and Google hard drives to store their stuff, then people would not accept it that easily. The words manipulate how you're trying to sell what you are trying to sell. So they only get away with it because people believe they're bullshit. That's basically what Yazhi said. Okay, 3 more mini topics. The next one is about Mexico's area of silence. It's a desertic area in Mexico where there is this urban legend, supposedly, that there are no radio signals and no type of communication. There's nothing there. Nothing can be received. That's why it's called area of silence. So Robert was asking if Yazhi knows anything about that, and Yazhi says it is a highly concentrated area of magnetic metals down there, and a large ley line nexus point. Of course there are portals there. Robert says interstellar portals or just lower astral portals, or all together. She says there is no difference. It all depends on each case. That's that on the area of silence, mini topic. Now, next one is about red mercury, because it was mentioned that they use that material in their anti-gravity technologies and engineering. And someone was asking in the English world, isn't that toxic, red mercury? And Yazhi says, well, yes, mercury is very toxic. However, here, important point, the fluid used here in Taygeta, there in their ships, is a compost. And the best way to describe what it does is using the name red mercury, although it is only a reference name. Not exact stuff we use as many times when they are using some of these terms as the near equivalent, because there is no exact translations in the language. And yes, it is toxic, but it's inside an engine. We don't recommend you eat it. And it is what humans have at hand to build an anti-gravity generator. And again, the fluid used in our engines is not exactly red mercury, but it does contain something similar. So that answers that question. Now, the last mini topic is about ionizing radiation at the poles. Because Yazhi says that, Aneka said at one point, that there is more concentration of ionizing radiation at the poles, precisely. But then Yazhi said at some point that this is where there is less. So is it more or is it less ionizing radiation at the poles? And Yazhi says, good question. Both are true, depending how you look at this, as it happens with many things and subjects and questions. And here she is showing us this image, toroidal image, and she says this. This is the last comment. of this video. In any toroid, you can see that the highest concentration of energy per square kilometer is at the poles. In that image, you can see how the waves are concentrated there to form something very firm and dense. But at the same time, there is also a hole if you know where to navigate. Is that understandable? Both cases are correct, says Yazhi. So this happens with many things and many questions, many doubts that people might have. Sometimes simply, the answer changes depending on how it is taken and considered and from what angle it is looked at. So that's that. I have another part of the mini topics in the making. I'm going to make it at some point, and the mini topics in that next video will be, for example, is it true that the ETs help because they went through the same in their past? It's something that typically floats around the spiritual circles about Pleiadians, for example. They went through the same as humans, now they are helping. And then about artificial intelligence, the natural, the tendency to go to the natural among Taiketans, and etheric bombs. What does it mean, etheric bombs? I'll leave you there thinking about it. What do you think that could refer to, etheric bombs? Then a little bit about history of Taygeta, a little bit about multiverses, that term multiverse, and what does Yazhi think about that. Bacterias, question from Dr. Alex, elves and gnomes. Also a question about the weakening magnetic field, is that true? Voynich manuscript, what does Yazhi think? Also, is it correct to say that they are 440,000 light years away? Is that the correct way to measure distance? And then also we'll mention something about the cricket powder in the food. That now the law has been passed very recently that they will be able to put that cricket powder with cyanide in it in food. So I'm going to share some links, and that is quite scary thing. So you'll have to look at the etiquettes. Anyway, I will talk about this in the next mini topic, okay? And then I have many other videos in the making. Of course, I do want to start the series on the ships. I have been telling you about that series for a long time. I have been preparing that material for like over a year or 2 years. Each time there was something mentioning about the ships, I would put that away. And I prepared the transcripts. It's like about 12 or something videos. I want to make it quite epic for you. And many other things. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much, all of you who are supporting the channel. Also, don't forget to support Maris Varo's channel, where she is sharing a lot of very interesting spiritual and technical on all subjects information. And well, enjoy your day, your evening, and I'm going to see you when I see you very soon. Bye bye everybody, and thank you for watching again. Bye.